Welcome to my studio. My name is Gretchen Stuppy. I am a contemporary painter who does mostly oil paintings. I use mostly palette knives, but I also do some painting with brushes. And I am here on this channel to share with you some of my painting strategies and techniques, as well as also how to start your own art business and start selling your art. So I'm very passionate about helping others as well. So if you like what you see here today, please consider subscribing. It actually helps me out and is what allows me to continue to create content for you. So today I want to talk about painting reflections, and I want to give you 5 tips or 5 little tricks that I've used to help me paint reflections. I'm going to focus today. I have a painting I started. Usually when I'm doing an oil painting like this, I am painting the subject as well as the reflection at the same time, but just for this demo, I've used got my boat kind of already blocked out here, and I'm going to add some reflection. This is a very colorful, very abstract painting, but some of these concepts apply to kind of whatever style you are painting with. So I will be showing you a little bit here on my painting, as well as I've got some photos so we can look at the different kind of what you want to be looking at when you're looking at the reflection. So today is a perfect day to do this because here in New Hampshire, as you can see behind me, in my studio, it is snowing, and it is lovely to be thinking about being near the water and not having frozen water and having some reflections to look at. So thanks for joining me, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that you should be focused on when you're looking at painting reflections is the perspective you have. So in general, a good rule of thumb is that the distance between the top and the bottom of your subject is going to be the same distance that you're going to be painting that reflection on in the water. So this photo here is a good kind of way of looking at this. So you can see in this photo that the top to the bottom of your object, or this bow of this boat here, is going to be about the same distance as the top to the bottom of your reflection. So if you were to paint your reflection really short here, it's going to look off. You're not going to be able to get that depth of perception or perspective. So, and that's going to be true of whether you're painting things in the background or you're painting a close-up subject. Okay, so for tip number 2, you want to pay attention to where your subject and your reflection meet. And in general, that is going to be, you're going to see the darkest colors in that area. So I'm just going to block in some of that shadowy area to show where the water starts. There are exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you'll see kind of a light or a reflection kind of the light right along that edge, but in general I like to start off with that dark section. So let me show you in a photo what you might be seeing when you're looking at that reflection in the water. So here's a good reference where you can see that this edge right here along where the boat and the water meet is typically dark. You're going to see some dark shades in there. So if we look at what that's going to look like when you get a painting, you want to really differentiate that reflection piece, the water part, with the subject, or the boat in this case. That brings me to tip number 3, which is pay attention to the light and the shadows in the reflection. So you're either going to see the reflection as darker than your subject or your object, which is what you see here, right in this area here, it's mostly a shadow, or you're going to see it lighter, which is when you're seeing the light from your object reflected down onto the water. So this is a really good photo because it shows both of those, so they can coexist. You can also have just one or the other. So it's going to be important when you're looking at your object to look at the water and decide whether your reflections are generally darker or generally lighter. So if you look at this painting here, you can see this section here, the reflection is generally lighter than the object, whereas on this side where there's shadow or shade, it is generally darker. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like on the painting I'm working on. So in general, the boat here that I have on my painting is it's a light color. You've got a lot of whites in here. And the background water is just very gray because This is kind of an overcast, very calm morning here on the water. So the reflection is going to be darker than the water around it and the boat. So as I block in more of the water, I'm probably going to bring this dark color back here in the water even lighter as it comes up, and that's going to contrast really nicely with my reflection in the water. So I start by just bringing in the colors and bringing the light down so that the darker water is in the background, and then I just round it out around my subject. So I'm not going to add a lot of reflective color in this part of the painting. I'm going to leave the water very kind of just similar colors because there's no other objects in there besides the boat. All right, so when we go to start laying in the boat reflection, I'm going to start by putting in my darks, and you can see there is a shadow on that right hand side of the boat. So that's where I'm going to focus my darkest reflections. And so I'll just be adding in each color. I'm going to make sure that I'm using a variety of shades and a variety of colors in there. And in general, as I said earlier, my colors are going to be darker in this part of the water, in this reflection, than on the boat itself. And I'm going to make sure I get all the colors that are in the boat in a kind of a different shade down in the water. Okay, so my next tip for painting reflections is to keep your strokes either vertical or horizontal. So I avoid diagonal strokes when I'm doing reflections. And you can see here, when I'm applying my strokes with my palette knife, or same thing with a brush, you're going to be pulling down like this and then going across. This is because if you look at reflections, the way the light is reflected down, that's how you're going to be seeing your colors. So I usually have a lot of strokes that are up and down as I paint, like that. Once I've gotten my painting, my reflections more established, I am going to do some just purely horizontal strokes, and that just gives the motion of the water. And you can see I did some of those coming out of this shadow right at the base as well. It's important to add a couple of the highlights of the different reflection pieces that have kind of escaped this area here down lower as well. And that brings me to my final tip, which is reflections, especially compared to when you're painting the subject matter, the object, they're very forgiving. So it's important to make sure that you are having fun with it, you're keeping it open, and you're keeping it creative. So I always like to add in some colors that kind of surprise or give a little bit of depth to the painting. So I'm putting in this kind of red, it reflects here, even though that color really wouldn't be reflected in the water, but having that pulls your eye down to the reflection itself. I'm probably going to add in a little bit more yellows as well, just because there's a lot of yellow, especially up in here. And that gives the sense that the water has that depth and shadow as well as the reflective piece of it. So that's it for today's 5 tips on painting reflections. Just to review really quickly, the first one is make sure that your perspective is right. So you have your subject here, your main part of the painting, and whatever is being reflected is about the same distance down into the water. So tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to pay attention to that area right where the boat or whatever you're painting is hitting the water. Often you're going to see a shadow. Keep an eye, study that reflection, because there are sometimes going to be reflections of light as well. But in general, I like to put a shadow right below that object. Number 3 is focus on the color. So you can see here the color of the boat is either going to be lighter or darker than the color of the reflection. So just depending on where the light is, where the shadows are. So pay attention to how that looks in your reflection. Tip number 4, when I paint reflections, I like to use up and down or sideways brush strokes, because that is what you're going to be seeing if you look at water. Generally, you'll see reflections going this way. It's very rare that you're going to see a diagonal, so avoid diagonals. And the last one is to have fun and keep it loose. The reflections are very forgiving. You're going to get different colors kind of reflecting back than you're going to expect. So it's a fun chance to add in a little bit of color to the whole painting. For example, this red in here that I added. So those are my 5 tips. If you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe. It helps me out so much. And I will see you back here in the next video. Thank you.